Alright, so here's a brand new skinning video. We're going to focus on our Bob character, and I'm going to break this video. I'm actually going to do 3 separate videos. I'm going to break the character into 3 parts. So right now I've got the Layer Explorer open, and just for a moment I'll put this off to the side. For this first video I'm going to focus on the shirt and the hands. Alright, so we have Bob modeled into separate pieces here. I'm going to focus specifically on the shirt and hands, and I'm really going to dive into the skin modifier and troubleshoot issues that we might have with the mesh. So we've been modeling our mesh using the mirror tool, the symmetry tool, all kinds of different modifiers and tools, and there could be hidden mesh errors causing us problems when we go to skin. So I'm going to try to address most of these issues. Keep in mind, if your mesh is messy, if it's not perfectly symmetrical, a lot of what I'm showing isn't going to work anyways. You need to make sure that your mesh is perfectly symmetrical with no errors and perfectly lined up in the center of the viewport. Okay, so let's get started with the skinning. I'm going to go into great detail with the hands as well and explain the weight tool. Okay, so the bulk of this is going to be covered in the shirt and the hands, and then we'll go on to finish it off with the pants and the shoes. We'll troubleshoot those, and then we'll spend some time on the head using the extra bones that we've put in here. Alright, so you can see I've still got this crazy paint on Bob. I'm just going to leave that in there for the video. Alright, so let's start by analyzing the shirt, and I'm going to isolate the shirt. So let's do this. I'm going to grab the shirt, and we've been using open subdivision. I'm going to delete that while I'm skinning. I'll add it back in later. I just want to make sure there's nothing in the modifier stack that's going to mess me up. You can see I already have a skin on here. I'm going to delete that one and start over. Okay, so this is a fresh mesh. If you have the unwrap UVW modifier in here still, you can collapse that down. Okay, we've already unwrapped the character. We don't need to have that stuff in there. I'm going to do the same thing with the hands. Okay, so I have the unwrap in here. You can right click, you can collapse it here or just convert it to editable poly, and that collapses the stack. Okay, make sure you remove open subdivision first. We don't want to bake open subdivision into our mesh. That would be bad. Okay, so here's what we're going to do next is we're going to add the skin modifier back to the shirt, but we want to make sure we're not wasting a bunch of time with the skin modifier. If we add the skin modifier and we just start picking out the bones that we want to skin, which is what we're going to do in the end, we could end up spending a lot of time going through here and just picking out the rib cage, the certain bones that we want, and blah blah blah. What we're going to do first is we're going to select everything, and we're going to troubleshoot the mesh to avoid wasting a bunch of time. So let's just throw everything on here. And you can quickly tell if your mesh is going to work with mirror mode. I'm going to right click and isolate the mesh. I've added all the bones in here for now, but all I want to do is I'm going to go up to the top of the skin modifier, turn on edit envelopes, make sure vertices is turned on, and if you click and drag, you should be able to pick up some verts. Right now I'm having my first mesh error. I can only select verts on the collar. Okay, so what we can do to change that is go under display, and there's an option to show hidden vertices. You can turn that on, and then I can select all the verts. But this is already an issue. This shouldn't happen, but it is happening. So I've turned on show hidden vertices, and that's my first red flag that something might go wrong here. So I'm going to click on the character's right arm, and I'm clicking on the upper arm, and I'm going to click and drag around all the verts at the end of the shirt, and we're going to open up the weight tool. Okay, the weight tool is going to allow us to assign weights from 0 all the way to 1. So this is 0%. This is 0.5 is 50%, 1 is 100%. You can also tap plus and minus on set weight or scale weight, which pretty much do the same thing. I'm going to be using set weight. But in this case, I'm grabbing all these verts at the end of the sleeve, I'm going to hit 0. I'm going to move up to the next row. Alright, so this edge loop belongs to this bone here. So I don't want this bone pulling on it. So we're also just doing a quick test. So let's just grab this loop. You can hit loop here and set it to 0. Before I get too far into this, I want to make sure mirror is going to work, because I'm planning on using mirror to copy all the weights, all the work I do on one side of the body, I want to copy it over to the other side, so I'm not spending twice as much time setting this up. So if you click on the envelope, you should see the colors here, and you can see I've removed the weight from this side of the arm. If I click on the same envelope on the other side, you can see the weight is still bleeding into the rest of the arm. So I'm going to try to mirror this now. Alright, you can click on this envelope to see if mirror is even working. If I turn on mirror mode, you'll see green bones on one side. Okay, the envelopes are green, and you'll see blue on the other side. Up here, if we look at our copy and paste options, you've got paste green to blue bones, and then right beside that is the opposite, paste blue to green bones. Then you've got paste green to blue verts. This is going to copy the vertex weights from one side to the other. And then you've got the opposite, blue to green. We're working on the green side, so I'm going to click, first I'm going to click paste green to blue bones. That's going to copy any envelope settings that we've changed. Okay, so I haven't changed any envelopes. I've changed weights. So now I'm going to click paste green to blue verts, and you're going to see it didn't work. So this is a problem. So we have two options of how we can fix this. This is telling me that there's something wrong with the mirror plane. So either my pivot point's not centered, or the X form of the object itself is messed up. So I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to delete the skin modifier. Keep in mind, if you're well into your skinning, you can always copy the modifier. And then if you make any changes, you can right click and paste it, and all your bones will be in here. But for now, I'm going to delete this. We're going to click on the mesh, and we're going to try, there's two things we can do here. And the first thing is we can click on the mesh, go to hierarchy, effect pivot only, reset the pivot. Okay, it's going to reset the pivot to the object. And then you can center the pivot to the object again. I'm going to right click on select and move, and X should be 0. Alright, if I turn this off, turn off effect pivot only, right click on select and move, X should still be 0. It's perfectly centered. Okay, so then I know the pivot point is centered. The next thing I'm going to try is I'm going to go to the utilities panel and reset the X form. So you're going to click reset X form and reset selected. This will add an X form modifier, and if you click on it, you should see this orange box. If I hit F to go to the front view, this orange box is the X form of the object, and it should cover the outside of the mesh, and it should be perfectly centered. Alright, so I've reset the X form. The next thing to do is to convert this to editable poly. I always make sure I've saved a backup before doing this, because sometimes it flips the mesh inside out. So I'm going to convert to editable poly, and then you're going to check the normals to make sure it didn't flip it. So if you select all the polygons like this, you can hit flip, and you'll see when it's flipped the polygons turn dark. So I'm going to flip it back. Polygons are bright, so that's telling me that the normals are facing out, so the normals are fine. So I'm going to do one more test. I'm going to throw skin on here again. I'm going to right click and isolate. We're going to put the skin modifier back on here. I'm going to add all the bones again just to make sure it's working before I pick through and select just the bones I need. And we're going to quickly set up that skin again on this arm. So I'm going to open up the weight tool. I'm going to click and drag, and make sure you've got vertices turned on. Okay, so red flag again. There's something wrong with the mesh. I can't select the verts even when I turn this on. Again, I have to go over here and turn on show hidden verts. Now I can select them. I'm going to set the weights to 0 here, and then I'll grab this loop. So select, if you just select 2 verts beside each other and hit loop, it grabs the whole edge loop. And then I'm going to set that to 0. So I'll go back to this arm here, clicking on the same envelope. You can see it's bleeding over still. I'm going to turn on mirror mode and do my test here. I'm going to click paste green to blue and paste green to blue, and it didn't work. Alright, so plan A didn't work. Now we have to go to plan B. In most cases, plan A works, where you reset the X form. For some reason, there's something else going on with this shirt. I know the shirt was modeled perfectly symmetrical, but there's something else going on. So the next step I'm going to take is I'm going to go back, delete skin. You can double check, make sure your pivot point is centered. You can reset the pivot, center it to the object, reset the X form. Those are the 3 steps you're going to take no matter what. And then I'll convert it to editable poly. Now what usually works when you have mesh errors like that is to just export the mesh as an OBJ and import it back in, and that usually clears any lingering mesh errors that you might have. Okay, so I'm not sure what's causing the error right now, but I'm going to take the mesh, the shirt, and I'm going to export selected. Alright, so I've got a folder set up here. I'll just call this Bob shirt. So I'm saving it as an OBJ. Okay, so make sure in the export options you chose OBJ from the drop down. Turn off export materials and create material library. We don't need that stuff. You can use the Mudbox preset, that's fine. I'm going to hit export, and then I'm going to hit done, and I'm going to take this shirt and delete it. Alright, and I'm going to go back up to file, import. I'm going to re-import the shirt, and the shirt shows up right where it should. And then you can go through this whole process again where we check the pivot point, effect pivot only, reset center to object. Okay, that just centers the pivot back. You can reset the X form again. You shouldn't have to do this, but we're going to do this anyways, just to be sure. Okay, so reset the X form one more time after importing, convert it to editable poly, and I'm going to test my skin again and see if I got rid of those errors. So skin modifier, we're going to quickly add the whole rig. And I'm going to turn on edit envelopes, vertices, and right away the red flag I had before is gone. I can actually select the verts without having to turn on show hidden verts. That's a good sign. I'm going to click on the envelope here. I'll grab the verts at the end of the wrist, open up my weight tool, just set those to 0. I'm going to set this next loop to 0. Okay, so I've taken the weight off of this arm. Now if I go to the other side, you can see it still bleeds over. If I turn on mirror mode, I'm going to paste green to blue bones, paste green to blue verts, and it's fixed. Alright, so we've just troubleshooted one of the biggest problems with skinning, and there's 2 options. There was option A and option B. Option B is basically option A, but we added the part about exporting the mesh and importing it back in. Exporting the mesh as COBJ is definitely going to clear the errors. If it doesn't, chances are it's something else going on where you have an asymmetrical mesh. So if you have messy geometry or there's vertices going back and forth down the symmetry line, you're not going to be able to use the mirror tool. Alright, so everything we did in these steps here should cover any errors you're having with skinning. So let's have a look at the hands now. I'm going to take the hands, go into the modify panel. I've got open subdivision and the unwrap in here. I'm going to delete open subdivision. I'll add that back again later. And I'm going to convert these to editable poly just to collapse everything else in the stack. Okay, again, you can also right click here and you can go collapse to. I'm just going to convert to editable poly. Okay, so again, making sure I didn't collapse open subdivision because I don't want to bake open subdivision into the mesh. And we're going to add the skin modifier and just test the hands for any of those errors we had with the shirt. So I'm going to click on skin. I'm going to add everything on the rig for now, so I'm not wasting time selecting through all the digits. And I just want to make sure skin is going to work with mirror mode. Okay, so up here under edit envelopes, I'm going to turn on vertices. You can right click and isolate the hands, and we're just going to do the quick test. So if I click on the palm, okay, so this is the envelope for the palm. I can click and drag to grab verts. Okay, so that first red flag we got with the shirt where we couldn't select verts, that's not showing up on the hands, so that's good. But I'm going to go down and open up my weight tool. I'm going to use the weight tool to set the fingers to 0 on the palm. And then if I click on the other palm, okay, just clicking on the envelope here, you can see it still bleeds onto the fingers. And I'm going to turn on mirror mode, and right off the bat I can see this isn't going to work. Okay, so with mirror mode, my mirror plane is way over here on this hand. It should be centered. Okay, so the mirror offset's set to 0, so this tells me I have to reset the X form for the hands. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm just going to delete skin. I'm going to take the hands, and you can see the pivot point is centered. So we're going to go up to hierarchy, effect pivot only. We'll reset the pivot point and then center it back to the object. So when I hit reset, you can see how it ended up over here, and that's not where we need it to be. So if you right click on the rotate tool, we'd already done this before, which is why my pivot point was centered, but you want to make sure that X, Y, and Z on the rotation of the pivot are set to 0. Okay, so we're changing the pivot point on the object here. So now we need to go and reset the X form so that it stays like that. So I'm going to click reset X form, reset selected, and then if I go to the modify panel, you can see this X form here, and it's all lopsided right now. So I'm going to convert this to editable poly, and then I'm going to check to make sure the normals didn't flip on either hand, which they didn't. Okay, and then I'm going to add that reset again, and you'll see this time the X form is straightened out. Okay, so this is what your X form modifier should look like. It should be straight and lined up with your object. Okay, so now that I've reset the X form, I'll convert this to editable poly again. My skin modifier, I should be able to use mirror. So we'll do a quick test just by adding all the bones in here. Have to make sure to end isolate. I'm going to add all the bones from the rig just to make it quick, so I can do a quick test. Alright, so I can select my envelope, turn on verts. I'm going to isolate the hands, click on all the verts for the fingers here. Again, we're just doing a test, so just grab some of them. Open up the weight tool, set them to 0, and then I'll click on the other envelope. Okay, as you can see it's not reset. If I hit mirror mode, the mirror plane is in the middle. That's a good sign. I'm going to hit paste and paste, and this time you can see it worked. Alright, so now that I know it works, I can go ahead and do all the work I need to do to set up all the skin weights on the hands and the shirt. So I could just go through and remove the bones that I don't need, but I'm going to delete these, and now that I know they work, I'm going to end isolate. I'll grab the shirt and I'll just start over, and now I'm going to add the skin modifiers back on there and just add the bones that I need. Okay, so the bones I need for the shirt, if I hide the shirt for a minute, I need to add all the bones underneath the shirt. So I'm going to be grabbing the rib cage, all the spine links. I'm going to grab the pelvis under here. I don't need the legs. I don't want the legs pulling on the shirt. Okay, so I'm going to grab everything from the pelvis up to the 2 neck bones. And then I'm going to grab each arm. So I'm going to grab the arm from the collarbone to the upper arm to the forearm, because the wrist ends here. And if I end or unhide everything, you'll see right here, that's as far as we need to go with the wrist. Okay, so I'm going to hide these in the background again. You need to make sure your whole rig is visible to add the bones. I'm going to add the skin modifier for the shirt. And I'm going to click add bones, and this time I'm going to go through and select only the bones that I need. This way it's not adding extra envelopes like the legs and causing extra work for me. I don't want to have to adjust envelopes on bones that aren't supposed to affect the shirt. So I'm going to go through and select by holding Control. So I need left collarbone. Holding Control, I'm going to select left forearm, left upper arm, the 2 neck bones, the pelvis, and then the right collarbone, right forearm, the rib cage, the right upper arm, and then all the spine links. Okay, so I'll just double check real quick. So I've got left collarbone, left forearm, left upper arm, right collarbone, right forearm, right upper arm, and then the rib cage, spine, and the pelvis and the neck. All right, I'm going to click select. So I have all the bones I need in here for the shirt. The next thing to do is to turn on auto key and set up an animation so we can test the rig. So I want to test the skin. I'm going to click on the base of the cat rig, go to the motion panel. Okay, I've got a layer in here. I'm just going to delete that one and add a new one. So I want to add a fresh ABS layer and turn on animation mode. I'm going to turn on auto key, go to frame 10, and we're going to rotate the arm. So I'm going to grab the elbow or the forearm. You can switch this to local, and I'm just going to bend this out, and then I'm going to bend it up to test the shoulder area. So I'm going to do all the work for the weighting on this arm, and then afterwards I'll use mirror to copy it over to that side. Okay, so I've got the animation in here. When you're working on the skinning, you can click on the mesh that you're working on, you can isolate it, and now you can just scrub between 10 and 0. And I can actually go to frame 0 and I can adjust the weights in here. Okay, so now I can go into the modify panel, open up skin, click on envelope. You can start with the envelopes. If you click on an envelope, you're going to have your 2 capsules. Okay, so you've got the bright red capsule in the middle, which represents the hot spot or the strongest amount of weight. If you click on, there's a ring around each capsule with vertices. You can click on the verts, and you can even switch this to local. And you can move this in and out and see how it affects the weight on the mesh. You can also click the outer burgundy colored capsule, and that's going to be your fall off. Okay, so I'm going to push this in so it's not pulling so much on the body, and then you can go between the 2 capsules to see how much you can pull on the arm, but I'm going to have to use the weight tool to fix things like this where it's denting in. Okay, so I'm just going to roughly adjust the capsules for now, and then I'll use the weight tool. So on a section like the elbow, I'm going to grab this outer capsule, and you can see I can pull it in and kind of fix it. I'm going to skip over to the forearm, try to do the same thing, just using the outer capsule. You can get it pretty close. In some cases, you can actually grab the envelope. So the yellow line is the envelope for the bone. And if you click on either end, there's a vert, and that'll allow you to move the envelope from that side. So you can kind of push this back, and it takes a lot of the weight off of the upper arm. Okay, so I can click either side of the envelope. If I wanted to move that side, I could. I'm going to hit undo on that. So I'm going to click on the upper arm and maybe pull this back a little bit too. Okay, so this is pretty much what the elbow should look like. I can use a weight tool to play with the end of the elbow, but this is close enough. If you really want to make sure your skin is working, at this point we can add open subdivision back in. Okay, this is going to stay here now. You're going to set your iterations to 2, and then you can drop back down to skin. And from here you can turn on show on result or turn it off. Okay, so if I turn on show on result, I can see how this affects the subdivided mesh. So this might help you to line these envelopes up better. Keep in mind I'm set to local. I'm moving the envelope along the direction of the bone or the arm. You don't want to move this off centered like this. This is going to mess the skin up. So just try to keep it in the local axis and in the direction of the bone. Okay, so with the envelopes you're only going to be able to get so far. If you want to fine tune this, we're going to have to go back and use the weight tool after. This is actually okay for the arm, but around the shoulder I'm definitely going to have to use the weight tool. Okay, so if I want to try to fix this shoulder area, I'll just go in here and grab the arm, and this is where you can open up the weight tool and you can select verts. Make sure vertices is turned on at the top here. So maybe I want to grab some of these verts inside of here. So I'm just grabbing the top 3 on these 2 edge loops, and I can tap plus or minus to add weight back to the arm or remove it. Okay, so in this case I want to make sure the arm's not collapsing at the shoulder, so I'm going to start adding weight back in. If you want to add weight to the whole loop, I'm going to hit undo. You can grab 2 verts like this and hit loop, and then you can tap weight back to that bone. Okay, so if you take your time, you can go around and really get the skinning on the character set up nice if you use the weight tool. Okay, so in a case like this, this is the middle edge loop that I wanted to have share between the arm and the body. So I might take a bit of the weight off of there, and I might weight the top differently than the bottom. So here I'm going to take the top 3 verts, and I might take some weight back to the arm here, and I'll take the bottom verts and maybe take some weight away. Okay, so I'm looking at these edge loops all the time. Right here it's a little crooked, so I'll grab these 2 and pull some weight back to the arm or back to the body. If I turn on show on results, I can see how it's deforming in there now, but basically you're just using your weight tool to try to fix this. So Bob has a funny setup for his arm. He's got a really long shoulder. It's really weird. So when you're animating Bob, chances are you're going to have to use the collarbone to fix some things. So I'm just noticing here too, I've got a key set on open subdivision. I'm going to delete that key. Okay, so this should be set to 2 from frame 0. So just going back to the envelopes, I'm going to leave the shoulder like this for now. I'll come back to the shoulder after. Okay, so we've pretty much got the arm done, except for we might tweak that shoulder later. I'm going to end isolate. I'm going to click on the rig, and we're going to do a setup on the body, just check the body. Okay, so in my animation layers here, I'm going to add another ABS layer. So you can stack these up. If I scrub the timeline, this ABS layer is going to override the first one. So now I can set up a new animation for the chest or the spine. So I'm going to grab this with auto key turned on. I'll go to frame 10 again, and I'm just going to rotate the spine back. We're going to really distort his body here. So this is where I can see if I'm going to have to go in and change envelopes or weights. So you can have them bend back, have them bend forward or down. You just want to test the character as far as you plan on bending him or her in your film. So you're just rigging the character to the extremes you need for the animation in your film. So it's best practice is to just make sure the character bends properly in all directions. So I just copied the key from frame 0 to 30. So I held shift, dragged it over, and then I'm going to set another bend going left and right. Okay, so we've got one going this way, and then go to frame 50, got one going this way. Alright, so this is a good range of motion to test for the spine. I also want to make sure that everything's working at the bottom here. We'll come back, once we skin it, we'll throw on some walk cycles and just make sure if there's any other tweaking we can do it later. Right now I'm just making sure that the character can bend properly in these extreme poses. Alright, so this already looks pretty good. I don't have too much work to do here. I'm just going to isolate the shirt. Okay, so I'm going to check this out. I'm actually not going to do too much to adjust this, I don't think. So we got pretty lucky here, and it's not just luck. We actually set the bones up really close to the mesh, which helps us to avoid doing extra work later. If you made the bones on your rig really small, these envelopes might not pick up the whole mesh properly. Okay, so if anything, I might go in and adjust, just check the weight on the collar. So I'll go back to 0. I'm going to turn off show and result for a minute and just see how that collar is weighted. You can see the ends of the collar are pretty well weighted to the rib cage. And then I've got my two neck bones here. So I've got a neck envelope here. Actually, that's the spine in here. The neck is way up here. Okay, so I feel like maybe the corners of my collar are being pulled too much by the rib cage. So I could always grab, I've got the spine selected here instead. I'll just see what happens if I change the weights here. So I've got the weight tool opened. I have just these verts at the end of the collar. If I tap the plus, it kind of pushes them out a bit. So now it's more weighted to the spine opposed to the rib cage. The other option would be to weight the whole thing to the neck up here, but I think that's going to mess it up pretty bad. So between the rib cage and the spine, I'm going to leave it like this. Okay, so now I have I'm going to select the rib cage, and we'll just see what happens if I change the weight here on the collar. Okay, so if I was to tap weight back to the rib cage, it's really stretching it here. So I'm going to take that weight away from the rib cage and leave it on that spine at the back. So you could actually zero that out. Okay, so now it doesn't look like the collar's stretching when he bends over as much. Okay, so with these spine links, the way we set the bones up, we made sure the bones were longer across the body opposed to being long up and down. and this gave us these capsules running from side to side. So for the most part, we don't need to change these capsules. They should be okay. If there was a part of the body that wasn't deforming properly, like maybe this area here, if it's pulling too far up, then I might grab the capsule and push it up a bit. And I'm going to try to make sure both sides are the same, because I won't be able to mirror these capsules. So again, you can turn on show on result, and we're just making small adjustments at this point. Okay, so I'm going to say that's okay for the shirt for now. I'm going to end isolate, and we're going to look at the hands. So the hands, we're going to get into great detail with the weight tool. We're going to make sure that these fingers are weighted perfectly. So for the hands, we're going to go ahead and set up some animation, and I'm going to click on the palm of the hand. Alright, so again, we've got the test we did for the spine. I'm going to go ahead and go to my motion panel. At frame 0, while we're still in the T-pose, I'm going to add an ABS layer, and that one will sit on top of the other ones. So I'll go to frame 10, and I'm just going to start curling the fingers. I want to just make sure that the fingers are not sticking together. Okay, so double click on one of the finger bones from the base, and make sure you're set to local at the top with the rotation tool. On frame 10, I'm going to curl the fingers. Do the same thing with this one here, and the last one I'll just curl it up, and you can curl the thumb too. So we're just setting some animation on the fingers to curl them out and make sure that the skin will stick. Okay, you can do this before or after adding the skin. Doesn't matter, but at frame 0 you have to make sure that the rig is in the T-pose. You can always turn off your animation layer as you're adding the skin as well, and then turn it back on after. Okay, so let's just do that. I'll turn this off. I'll turn off auto key. I've already set the animation up. I'm going to click on my hands, go into the modify panel, add the skin modifier. So this one we're going to be very careful about selecting only the bones for everything, pretty much everything from here down. So everything from our forearm down for both sides. Alright, because that's as far as we modeled the hands. It's modeled up to here. You can see it in the middle there. So we want the bones from here all the way over added in here. So we're going to go back to the skin modifier, add the bones, and I'm going to go through the list and carefully select. So I've properly named everything on my rig. I know that the digits are just for the hands. I renamed the digits on the feet, so they're just called toe. So I'm going to go through here and I'm going to start picking. And on the left side, I've got all the digits. You can start by holding Shift and select all the digits. From this point on, I have to hold Control though. Alright, so I've got the digits for the left hand. I'm going to hold Control and add the forearm and the palm. And that's all you need for the hands, for one side. Now we have to add everything for the right side as well still. So I'm going to go down here, just hold Control and select each digit. That gets all the fingers and the thumb. We're going to add the forearm and the palm, and that's it. Alright, so both sides should be the same. Digits, forearm, and palm. Then click Select. Now they're added in there. And I'm just going to rotate here. We've already set up the animation. I'm just going to click on the rig, go to the motion panel, turn the animation on. You can scrub and you can see where the fingers are not sticking properly. Alright, so now we're going to select the mesh for the hands. We're going to right click, isolate selection. You'll still see the animation. We're going to work on this side and then mirror to the other side, since we fixed any issues we had with mirroring before. Now we can just focus on this hand. Because we've modeled the hands the way we did, where we do have all quads in here, but the most important thing is we've set up 3 edge loops for each knuckle. This is going to make skinning a lot easier as far as skinning a low poly mesh like this goes. So I can add open subdivision, but I'm going to add that later. For now, we're going to go into our envelopes, and you can click on the envelope for each finger, and you're going to see how it's bleeding onto the neighboring finger. There shouldn't be any color on this finger here. Okay, so if I click on each envelope, the middle finger is even worse. It's pulling on these fingers, and we don't want them to. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to start with the middle of this finger here. I want to try to explain how this works. And even before we get into that, let's just remove any extra weight that we have on the neighboring fingers. So let's start with that. So you can start with the end envelope here, and then I'll come back and explain what the weights should be doing between each bone. So starting here, we're going to turn on vertices. We're going to open up the weight tool. Okay, we're not even using envelopes for the fingers because we're going to just control it with the weight tool. I'm going to select all the verts up to here. So I'm selecting verts on these 2 fingers only, and you can rotate around, make sure you didn't select anything on this finger. You can even hit T to go to the top view, straighten it out. Okay, so starting with this envelope on the first finger, I'm going to remove weight from the other fingers. So I'm going to hit 0, and I'm going to zero out the weight on the neighboring fingers. So I'm clicking on the next envelope, hitting 0, clicking on the next envelope here, and hitting 0. Alright, so if I click on these envelopes again, they're not pulling on the finger beside it. So I'll do the same thing from the middle, and I'm going to choose new verts. I'm going to select all the verts on this finger, hold Control, select all the verts on the pinky finger, and I'm going to go through each envelope and hit 0. Alright, so I'm removing the weight from the neighboring fingers. Now they shouldn't pull on each other. I'll click on this one and do the same thing. So all the verts down here now, okay, up to the middle of the finger, we're going to go through and hit 0. Oops, make sure you keep them selected. I just hit undo. So I'll go through again and just double check and make sure envelopes are not affecting the neighboring fingers. And then if you go to perspective and zoom in, you can scrub through. So you can see the fingers still need work, but they're not pulling on each other. Alright, I'm going to go back to the top view, and I'm going to try to explain how the weights should be set up between each knuckle. So starting with the middle envelope, okay, so this is the middle bone. There's 3 bones to each finger. I've got the middle envelope, and I'm just looking at the color for now. Right now everything is set to a weight of between 0.2 and 0.5. Everything's yellow or kind of orange. We've modeled 3 edge loops for each knuckle, and we need them to bend in the middle edge loop. So for this envelope in the middle, I'm going to click on a vertex here on this side of the bone, and I'll select the vert above it and hit loop. This loop is made for this bone here, so I'm going to set that weight to 1 for now, and then the same thing with this one on this side. I'm going to hit loop and set the weight to 1. Alright, so then the middle edge loop for each knuckle, I'm going to hit loop, and it should be about 0.5. Okay, so same thing going this way. Going to hit loop and 0.5, and then from that point this bone should not be pulling on the skin on this side of the finger. So I'm going to hit loop here and set the weight to 0 up there. So you can double check and make sure it's set to 0 at the tip. Okay, so we're just dealing with this bone right here. Okay, so on this side it's the same thing. So this middle one, again, this should be 0.5, and then the next one up should be 0, and then there should be nothing over here. Alright, so that's basically how the bones should work. Okay, so I chose this one in the middle because it's affecting both sides of the finger, but the edge loops on this side of the bone are set to 1. The middle edge loops are 0.5. They're being shared between the other bones. So if I go to the tip, click on the envelope here, so all the verts on the tip of the finger should be set to 1. This bone should control those verts. I'm going to select the loop on this side of the bone, should be set to 1, and then I'll select the verts in the middle and they should be 0.5. Okay, so we're just roughing this in, or blocking this in if you want. We're going to have to go back and tweak it, but this is going to set us up as close as possible to having the fingers working. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this finger here, this bone, and I'm going to click loop on this inside edge loop and set that to 1, and then same thing on this side, so loop and 1, and then the next one over on either side is going to be set to 0.5, so loop and 0.5, and then this middle one here is 0.5. Alright, so if I click each envelope, they should pretty much look like this. So I've done the one finger. I'm going to go ahead and do the other fingers as well. Alright, so at this point we're setting weights, so now the envelopes aren't going to affect anything. And just to show you, if I click on the envelope here and I start pulling this, this no longer works. The capsule's not going to work anymore once you get into setting weights. So if you're going to adjust your character's envelopes using the capsules, you do that first, and then you can go in and start setting weights. Once you get into the weight tool, the capsules no longer work. So let's go to this finger, do this one. So once you get used to this, you can do it pretty quick. So I'm going to hit, you can actually do both of these at the same time if you click and drag, but I'm just going to click, hit loop, and 0.1. So click these two, loop, 0.1, then I'll do the middles, 0.5, 0.5, and then everything after that should be set to 0. Whoops. You can hit Alt-X to make sure you're clicking the right verts, make sure you're not selecting things in the back. So 0 on this one, there's already no weight here, so I don't have to hit 0 up there. And then I'll get this one here. This one should be 0.5, and everything after that should be 0. Okay, so I'm going to grab the next envelope. Everything at the tip of the finger should be set to 1. Whoops, just make sure you only click that finger. So this loop on this side is set to 1, and then the middle is shared at 0.5. Okay, so clicking through here, all my fingers so far look like this. Go ahead and do the pinky. Again, the middles here are 0.5, and then everything past that should be 0. Just make sure there's no blue in here, so I can see where it's kind of leaking out to the tip of the finger here. So I'm going to make sure that's set to 0. There should be no blue in there. Alright, so one more time I'll check. So far, so at the end here, I'm going to make sure the end finger is set to 1. This is set to 1, and this is set to 0.5. Alright, so just double checking. This is what my envelopes should look like. You can do the same thing for the thumb. So starting with the base of the thumb, we'll grab this loop here, set that to 0.1. I'll leave the weight on the palm side for now. This loop here is going to be 1. The middle loop is 0.5. And then everything beyond that should be 0. And then on the end, the tip will be 1. This is going to be 1, and the middle is 0.5. And then everything past that should be 0. Alright, so we've set the weights on each bone for each finger. Now when we test this, it's still going to need some work, but this will give us a good starting point. So I'm going to go into perspective, hit Z to zoom back in, hit Alt X, and then if we scrub the timeline, you can see the fingers are, the bones and the skin above are stuck in the right spot. You can see where there's some problems, and we'll go in and fix those. Alright, so I'm going to add open subdivision, and we'll test it with open subdivision on there as well. Set that to 2 iterations. Okay, so it looks better with open subdivision on. We've bent the pinky finger in the opposite direction, but we're just trying to test the skin. So what we can do now to go in and refine this is go into each envelope. You're going to turn off show end result, click on the envelope that you want to work on. Alright, so in here I'm going to scrub this back a bit. And basically you're just going to work with the middle edge loop between each bone. Alright, so I'm either going to push the weight to one side or the other. But if you go up to the top here, you can click on 3 verts plus the sides on any of these middle edge loops, and you can keep your weight tool open, and you can turn on show end result once you've selected those verts, and then you can either push weight to one bone or the other to try to spread the weight out over the knuckle better. So if I hit plus, you'll see it's pulling some of this weight back to the finger here. If I click on the other bone, I could hit plus or minus and just kind of tap the weight between them. And for the most part, we want the crease underneath to be pretty sharp, but we want to make sure that the knuckle on top is not too sharp. Alright, so I'm going to turn off show end result, and I'm going to check this knuckle here. So I'm basically going from the middle of this middle edge loop. Okay, so the vert in the middle here, and then if I hold control select the top 3 and then add that middle on the side. And then turn on show end result. This will help you decide how much weight to push to either bone. So I'm just tapping weight back to the bones on either side, and that just fixes the knuckle. Okay, so this finger is set up pretty good. And if I scrub the timeline and push the curl, that's pretty much what I'm going to be doing for each finger. Okay, so we'll do it again real quick here. Turn off show end result. You're going to select, again, we're selecting the middle edge loop between each knuckle, or each bone. We're selecting the top 3 verts, and then we're adding the vert on the side, on both sides. We're turning on show end result so we can see it subdivided, and then we're going between these 2 bones. I'll start with this one and tapping weight back to them. Okay, so you can just tap this a couple times on each bone, and it'll blend the weight over the knuckle better. Okay, so turn this off. I'm gonna select the middle here. 3 verts on top, 1 on each side. Turn on show end result. Tap the weight back on both bones, and it blends the knuckle. Okay, 1 more finger and then we'll do the thumb, and then we should be able to look at the wrist and just about get ready to mirror this over. Okay, at this point I've got that finger curled up funny. I'm gonna end isolate, bring back the fingers here, and change the animation on that finger. Alright, so I'm gonna double click that bone, and I'm going to curl this back down. Turned on auto key, so we don't want to test it bending the wrong way. Let's do this. Turn off auto key. Click on the hand, isolate selection, and then we can look at this from here. Okay, so you can see here, I'm going to have to adjust this. So I'm going to click on the envelopes and do the same thing I was doing before. Okay, so I hit Z to zoom in on the envelope, and then I can rotate around it. And I'll just start with the end of the finger so it's easier to look at. I'm going to scrub back. It's kind of hard to see what's going on here. And maybe go all the way back to 0. Make sure I can select these top 3 verts and the side. Turn on show end result, scrub forward, and then tap the weight out like this. So you can see how that's fixing the weight. That's pretty much all you need to do for each finger. Okay, let's check the thumb. The thumb actually looks okay, but we'll double check. Again, if you just want to double check, you can go ahead and select those same verts on that knuckle. Okay, so we only modeled 1 knuckle. Show end result, curl the thumb, and then you can tap the weight back or forth. Alright, so the fingers look good. We'll just double check that the wrist works. So I'm going to end isolate again. We'll click on the palm, make sure we can use the same animation layer. I'm just going to turn on auto key. And we're just going to put that more like a fist. Or, whoops, let's make sure we're on the right key first. Okay, so the fingers were animated at 10. I'm going to grab the palm and we'll just bend the wrist. Okay, so you can see we just have to do some minor tweaking on the wrist here. If you want to bend the wrist there, you can also go to frame 20 and bend it up. Just make sure you get the full motion, the full range for the wrist, and then we can fix it. Alright, so let's click on the mesh, isolate it. And actually it's going to be difficult to fix this without seeing the rest, so I'm going to undo that. We want to make sure we can see the bones this time. So I'm going to click on the mesh, go into envelope, turn off show end result. You can always take the bone if it's in the way. You can hit Alt X, put the bone in see-through mode, do the same thing here and here, and then I'll click the mesh. So first I'll just start by grabbing the envelope for the forearm, and if I scrub back and forth you can see where the arm's popping out, and we're just going to need to grab the verts on this side of the wrist, and they need to be set to 1 so they stick to the arm. Okay, so that's an easy fix there. Now at the wrist itself you can see where it's kind of collapsing. We don't want it to collapse. You can turn on show end result and you'll see it looks okay, but it is collapsing. So we're going to grab the edge loop that we put in for the arm side. We'll hit loop. That should be set to 1. Okay, so it's almost like the fingers in here. And then that next edge loop towards the palm should be about 0.5. So you can hit loop, 0.5, turn on show end results, and that pretty much fixes it in there. So you can almost blend the top of the wrist the same as we did with the fingers, but the wrist can actually bend up and down, whereas the knuckles for the fingers only bend in. We can't bend them up without breaking the finger. So this time we're just going to keep that middle edge loop set to 0.5. Alright, so let's have a look at this. We can, if you want, you can right click and isolate the hand. You can hit F4 and just have a look at the mesh, make sure everything looks good from here. If you want to tweak anything at this point you can, but I'm going to go ahead and try mirroring this. You should be saving as you're going. I'm going to save this just in case anything crazy happens. It's a good idea to save before you do any big changes. So I'm going to hit the mirror tool. I already hit save. We're going to go into skin, turn off show end result, click on envelope, click on an envelope over here. You can see what the weight should look like. You can hit F4 to turn your edges back on. If I click on the envelope here, you can see the color's different. If I turn on mirror mode, we already fixed the mirroring before, so it should work now. If I click on paste green to blue bones and then green to blue verts, now it mirrored. Everything works perfect. And I'll just scrub here. Everything looks good. Now if I want to fix anything, I can fix that side and mirror it. I'm going to end isolate, and if you want you can just do a quick test. Just grab the palm here, and if you move it, it should work. I'm going to hit undo. I want to keep it in the T-pose, and I'll just try curling a finger so everything works. Hit undo, and that's it. So we've got the hands and the shirt skinned at this point. So I'm going to make a separate video for the pants and the shoes, and then I'll do another one dealing with the head.